T Morrow by Paul John Lim, Part 8. Last time, Thomas set off on a fantastic adventure to find a Yeti. Meanwhile, back on the mountain, 10 days had passed. They had set up a final high base camp. They had been on several excursions, and as Smythe said, caught nothing but colds. And Carl was struggling with a severe chest infection. Tempers were frayed, and the cold was wearing them down. The natives from the village had returned back down the valley with the dogs and sleds the day before, and would return in 4 days. 2 days passed. Carl said angrily, "Another waste of a day. Your bloody guides are useless, Thomas. If I didn't know better, I would think you are sending us away from the creature." Thomas said, "Why do you think one hasn't been found? They are particularly elusive. Did you think we would simply walk up the mountain and meet one? Westward, I'm off to shoot something instead of these bowls of fattened cereals." He pulled on an extra layer, grabbed his rifle and a box of bullets, and opened the tent door, letting in a flurry of snow and wind. Carl said, "Christ, Westwood, close the bloody flap, it was freezing in here to start with." They all saw briefly that it was a whiteout outside. You couldn't see your hands, let alone find your way. Westwood had been gone a while now, and Thomas said, "He must be losing it. If he's not straight back, I'm going to have to go and find him, if he's not back in 15 minutes. Smythe said, "I can't tell you how long it's been. As you know, some Tibetan is now wearing my fob watch." The wind was increasing. It was not unknown for wind speeds of 100 miles per hour. Outside they heard voices. The guides were putting extra ropes over the tents and were driving in spikes to hold them tightly in place. Thomas said, "OK, I'm off to find the idiot." He had already added goggles and a thicker wool coat, and soon was opening the flap. As he was fastening it back, he and the others heard first a shot, then a second, then silence. Thomas beckoned to one of the guides, who accompanied him, both leaning into the wind and snow. It didn't take long to find Westwood. He had fallen down a ledge and lay unconscious, his right leg at an alarming angle. The rifle had been fired and lay close to him. Thomas took off his top coat, and between them he and the guide slithered down to where he lay. They placed him on the coat and wrapped the sleeves around, binding both legs together. Then they dragged him up a more gentle slope and were eventually back in the tent. Inside, the men looked at each other. He was out cold, and Thomas used a piece of wood from his rucksack frame and bound the damaged leg to the good leg. He also cleaned the gash on his forehead. Beneath it was a large lump, which had increased in size dramatically. Thomas said, "Let us pray for a good day tomorrow. His expedition is over. 2 guides will have to take him back down. Anyone else want to quit and leave at the same time? Your chest doesn't sound too good, Carl." Carl snapped, "I am of Aryan descent, and I am fine." Smythe, "What was he shooting at, I wonder?" At this point Westwood regained consciousness. Westwood, where am I? Did I get it? It took 2 shots. Did I get it? Carl says, "What did you shoot?" Westwood, "God, my leg is killing me." His numb fingers reached down to his legs. 2 fingers were black. He had taken off his right glove to fire the rifle. The glove was gone. It was 15 feet high, covered in white fur. It saw me and was coming at me. I managed to get 2 shots off at it. Then I fell. He then tried to sit up and screamed in agony. "Ah!" They helped him lay down. Thomas gave him drops of diamorphine from a bottle, and after moaning in pain, he was soon asleep. Carl said, "So we had a visit after all. The creature must have been watching us. We must lay Westwood's traps tomorrow, close to the camp where the creature was seen." The storm raged on for 4 hours, then eased as sudden as it had begun. Just before dawn it stopped blowing, and the snow stopped falling. Soon it was dawn, and the guides had made ready and left early to begin their descent with the semi-delirious Westwood. Thomas had left a few minutes earlier, saying he was going to go to relieve himself. Smythe and Carl came out from the tent a few minutes later and walked to where Thomas had found Westwood. Thomas had walked to where the creature should have stood, and luckily any tracks had been covered while the snow was still falling. Thomas saw them coming and shouted, "I can't believe the creature would dare to come so close. It must have been something else, a goat or a yak." Carl said, "Whatever it is, it will be back, and this time it will be in one of our bear traps." Westwood had brought with him some formidable bear traps he had used in the past. Carl and Smythe laid them in the area the creature would have to walk to approach the camp. Thomas felt sick to the stomach. Would he have to kill them so the creature would be free to be able to fulfill his promise to the yogi? Thomas had never killed a fly, and he winced at the very thought of it. Could he bring himself to do that? He doubted it. The two guides who had been on the mountain had made no contact since he asked them to keep their distance. Could he count on them for help? He now only had the two guides for all he knew, that is, once they returned from the valleyway below the camp. The following days there was no sign of the Yeti, and food was desperately low. In the morning of the third day, Carl came rushing back after a wander outside, shouting and coughing at the same time. "There are footprints! Huge footprints!" Thomas and Smythe were soon looking at them. Smythe, "It's as if he knew where the traps were and had danced around them." Thomas said the creature could probably smell human on them. Carl shouted angrily, "That's decided it then, Smythe." He coughed. "We have to go to find it whilst we still have some scraps of food left, and I am not waiting for any guides. We can do it ourselves." No amount of persuasion from Thomas could dissuade him. After much debating, Smythe finally had to agree with Carl. He did have a point that if the creature had been recently to the camp, its lair couldn't be far away. If so, they needed to strike out that very morning. Thomas had to go along with the plan. Soon, with minimal rations, and Carl now armed with Westwood's rifle and handguns, they set off. Thomas was aware that although the weather was hazy sunshine, the wind was changing direction as they proceeded higher. The temperature began to drop as the sun disappeared, and the mist rolled dramatically above. 20 minutes later, the wind began to tear at the men, and the temperature plunged lower. Then, just as Thomas was arguing that they should return, a nearby peak disappeared in a whiteout. Thomas shouted, "We need to hunker down." He could make out an overhang in the rock in the distance, but soon was lost from view in the mass of white before his eyes. Carl, coughing into his many layers, got out the ropes and retied themselves together, leaving a good 12 feet between each of them. Carl led, followed by Smythe, and at the rear Thomas. The wind-driven snow was gusting violently, knocking them around like paper dolls. Now they could not even see each other. Suddenly Carl shouted in a high pitch, and his voice faded away. Immediately the rope tensioned and quickly pulled Thomas and Smythe over, and they were being dragged forward. Smythe quickly managed to get out his pick, but there was nothing to dig into. He tried desperately to find something. Then the pick found rock, and with a blind thrust it somehow found a gap between the exposed rocks. The yank almost tore his arm from the socket, but despite his age, he was both fit and strong. He did not let go. Thomas had dug in his heels as best as he could. Smythe said, "I think I have it for now, but for how long I don't know I can hold." Thomas shouted against the wind, "I will take the rope off me, crawl to you and see if I can tie the rope off on the rocks." Thomas had to remove his gloves to grip the rope, and the ice burnt and stung. He got as far as looping the rope around, then without warning the rope again was slithering, pulling Smythe towards the crevasse. His legs were now dangling over, as he managed to find purchase with his pick on the rocks, and held on for dear life with his other hand. He reached with his left foot and managed to rest it in something. The rope below, with Carl at the end, was spinning slightly. Thomas managed in this brief moment to tie off the rope. Carl, at the end of the rope, was silent, unconscious perhaps. Thomas now stood and reached as best he could to take Smythe's hand. Carl was now regaining consciousness, and soon was aware of the plight they were in. It was too far, and Smythe slipped a few inches further down. Thomas pulled on the rope, but it was useless. Smythe suddenly shouted to Thomas, "Behind you, man, behind you!" Thomas quickly looked round to see a huge bulk of a white creature moving towards him through the snow swirls. He prepared for his demise and closed his eyes. Soon the rope went taut beneath him and began to rise, so he rolled off to one side. The creature had hold of the rope, and all of his 15 feet high bulk was leaning back as he walked slowly backwards. Thomas grabbed the rope too and began to pull also. Smythe now had a good foothold, and then found a grip on the rocks and was crawling out. But it was then that the creature slipped and fell. Suddenly now Smythe was dangling precariously, scrabbling to no avail for a handhold, straight over the edge again. Carl now came to terms with his fate, and as things were now at a stalemate, he reached down for his knife. The weight below Smythe suddenly disappeared, and he realised what Carl had done. The creature was now back on its feet, and pulling back with Thomas closer to the edge of the crevasse. Smythe rose as the rope creaked on the sharp stones at the edge, and a few strands snapped. Without the weight of Carl, however, Smythe was able to find both hand and footholds, and slowly edged himself upwards. Thomas now could reach him, and managed to pull him up. Smythe rolled onto his back panting. It was then that the creature dropped the rope, stood in the swirling blizzard for a few seconds, and then disappeared. By the time they reached the camp, the two guides had returned, along with the other two Thomas had had to observe at a distance. When Smythe told our story to them, he was surprised by their reaction. They simply smiled. Smythe, instead of a hunter for a specimen, was now a champion for these creatures. He could now become famous as the man who had personally witnessed this extraordinary event. He realised the creature must be intelligent, and also had showed compassion, which is a very human quality, and thank goodness it had.
4th of July, 1910. We left base camp a few hours ago in search of this mythical creature. We avoided an avalanche and climbed left over Summit Ridge. In the distance, we could see the weather worsening. The wind started to howl. The snow started to fall, swirling round in a big mist. And then suddenly, coming towards us in the distance, we saw it. My goodness.
After their ordeal, he returned to London. Smile went on to return on 3 occasions over the next few years. However, he never encountered the creature again. Sales of his book sold numerous copies. He titled it In Search of the Yeti in the Highest Peaks on Earth. Thomas and his guides eventually arrived back at the mountain sanctuary. The yogi was pleased to hear their tale. The yogi said, "So, Thomas, you have finished your first task. You have only one task to complete." Thomas said, "I have completed the task, and you said I could leave. I need to find my Letitia." Yogi, "Yes, and you have completed it admirably. You have fulfilled the prophecy. Certainly you will leave soon. This second and final task is for you to complete as and when you feel obliged to do so. You may recall our conversation prior to your departure of the contents of Theodore's journal. As you know, it ended abruptly. When he came to us, he imparted information not written in his journal. He had had an encounter with a creature not of this earth, and only managed to survive by using this machine to escape. The creature did, however, die. We need you to try to locate where it came from, and to see if it could ever happen again. We ourselves, not only as a repository of mankind's knowledge, but as guardians also." Thomas blurted indignantly, "Why me?" The yogi replied, "It seems fate and destiny has chosen to thrust all of this upon your shoulders. It is a great burden, and now part of your id, as you will discover. You are in favour with the gods, and you must see that synchronicity is now your friend. Follow your heart, and may all the dawns you witness be the start of your life anew." With this, the yogi closed his eyes and was soon in a trance-like meditative state. Thomas thought and stood up. As he walked out onto the temple complex, he realised fate had played its part all through his life. He went to find the boy who had befriended him and had mended the device. As he walked closer, he could see the boy had a group of cross-legged priests surrounding him. He was seated on a small circular dais of stone. As the holy man chanted a low mantra, the boy very slowly rose up to 2 feet into the air and hovered above the stone dais. The breeze flapped his orange robe beneath him. Thomas realised it was time to leave. He knew his way to the caverns and left them to find the device once again. He took a torch off the wall and entered the caverns. He soon found the device in the distance, lit by the flickering light. As he got closer, he saw the wrist controller sitting on the seat. It was resting upon a well-aged journal. He put the wrist controller on and opened the journal. He immediately saw that pages had been carefully torn out here and there. He correctly assumed that these were the ones given to him by Mr. Tarningdale back in Oxford. Towards the end, acting as a bookmark, was a handwritten note. He guessed it was from the boy priest. It said, "I enjoyed your friendship, and I assume you will want to have this. Look at the pages I have selected. Goodbye, my friend." He read them by the light of the torch, and there were 2 hand-drawn diagrams on the selected pages. One page showed the wrist device with the face hinged in an open position. The second had an arrow pointing to a small lever within the compartment. Alongside the arrow was a further handwritten text, which read, "This lever, when moved to the left, enables the device to move into the ether for a short period of time." A further handwritten text added later said 1 hour. The device will, once the wrist controller is not within close proximity, go into a waiting state. Should any biological-based creature be within approximate visible distance, the machine will travel in time and will occupy several destinations without materializing. In short, the device becomes invisible, but for no more than 1 hour. If there is still a perceived threat or a malfunction, in order to protect itself, it will use the remainder of its power to travel to where it was found. This is within a tunnel complex near the Himalayas. The device uses the Earth's magnetic field to recharge. This I construed after many trials and tests I made. I also found myself diverted to this location on one such occasion. Theodore Morrow. Thomas thought, yes, the yogi did say Theodore had visited and had stayed for a time at the temple. It was Theodore who had taught him to speak English.